Welcome back to Edward Baker Performance. It's week 2 of my Return to Play series, and today I want to talk about surgery. I'll start by telling a story about a conversation I had with my orthopedic surgeon. So he was telling me prior to repairing my bicep tendon that this operation carried with it a higher than normal risk of complications. I said, okay, what's the risk? He said, well, the risk is I'm going to drill into your radius with a high-speed drill, and if I slip 2 millimeters, I could hit your radial nerve and paralyze your hand permanently. So, okay, how many operations of this type have you done? And he said, about 1 a month for 10 years. So, okay, how many people have you paralyzed? And he said, well, none yet, but that just increases the probability that sooner or later I will, Mr. Baker. So we left the conversation there, and I went home to think about whether or not I wanted to proceed. And I started with this story because I want to pick up about the concept of ownership that I talked about in the last video. If you're a professional athlete, you have a very different experience of an injury to everybody else. So I've been courtside with an elite team when someone has gone down with an injury. We were in a different country on a training camp prior to a competition, and I helped take that person to a doctor. Within 30 minutes, they were being seen. Within an hour and a half, they'd had a scan, and later that day, still in their kit, they were receiving treatment. So as a professional athlete, if you have an injury, you're thrust into a process that's beyond your control. You almost don't have time to think about it. Now, as an aside, I think that's one of the contributing factors potentially to the high incidence of re-injury, is removing agency from the athlete, thrusting them into a process they don't fully understand, and then trying to cram in too much too soon. That's possibly a discussion for another time. But if you're not a professional athlete and you've injured yourself, like my bicep at 36, definitely not a professional athlete, you're going to have a lot more time to sit around and think about what you're going to do now to move forward. And you might be thinking, well, I've snapped something serious, so of course I need a procedure. But that may not be the case. In the case of my bicep tendon, I did not need to get the repair to live a full and active life. And that would be the same for another common injury like an ACL rupture, for example. You may not be the world's best downhill skier without that ligament in your knee, but you can live a full, active and rewarding life. So in the case of my bicep, if I hadn't have had it repaired, I could still flex my arm, supinate my wrist, but I would lose about half the strength that I'd had before. So I'd be lousy with a screwdriver, and I'm not going to break any chin-up records without that procedure. But of course, I would have avoided any risk of any complications, as every surgery carries a risk, and I could have got back to training and the things I enjoy, albeit in a modified way, much faster. I could have done that immediately. So that's something to consider. And 2 things helped me make my decision. And the first was to really examine my sense of identity and self, my values and the things that are really important to me. And hard physical training, boxing, martial arts, the things I love, being able to throw my children in the air and play vigorous games with them is really important to me, and that's something that I wasn't ready to let go of. I still wanted to be able to make progress in the gym with my training, etc. So it was important that I got the procedure. I was able to accept that risk because the outcome was something I desired more than that. And I really advise you to weigh up what's most important for you. When you do that, you'll be at peace with your decision and you can really move forward and attack the next phase, whatever that may be. The second factor that helped me was being a coach. I wanted to know if I could do it, learn something, and then help somebody else. So all these principles that I teach in my day-to-day job, or I advise athletes, could I actually do them myself? Could I walk the walk and get through it and make a success of it? And if you can learn something from a negative experience that helps even one person, it puts the whole thing into perspective and really gives it more value. And so for that reason as well, I decided to go ahead and see how well I could do with this return to play. So if you do decide to go ahead and get a surgery, you want to make sure you're in tip-top condition before you go under the knife. not only to reduce the compensations and the detraining effect that you're going to get, but also so you can bounce back quickly. If you can't move whatever bit's been injured for whatever reason, depending on the injury, you should mobilize the joints above and below or adjacent to it to stay as mobile as possible. So there are some exercises I'll show you now that I did to keep my shoulder and arm as mobile as I could and keep the muscles that supported my shoulder healthy before I went in, so that I could recover faster and have fewer compensations when I came out of that surgery. So my number one priority before surgery was to maintain the health of my shoulder, particularly scapular kinematics, so the ability to control my shoulder blade and achieve a good shoulder position. So having this injury, my arm wanted to be in this protective position, shortened, internally rotated in front of the body, and that was where it was going to spend a lot of time when I came out of the surgery too. So the first thing I did was to hang my arm in a band, reduce the weight of the limb, and just perform some pressing and pulling movements. I couldn't quite get this range at the time, but that's how I started. I incorporated some upper body rotation as well, just to keep this natural movement. And then I hooked the band above the elbow, so taking out the contribution of the bicep I didn't have, and put some tension in the band and perform kind of a hybrid lat pull down stroke rowing motion. Okay, so allow the shoulder to come forward and then pull it down into the socket, and then perform the rowing motion, squeeze with the lat, keep the shoulder away from the ears, just practicing good scapular position, very high reps to keep that well conditioned. I also did a ton of external rotations, so just periodically throughout the day, hundreds of reps with no weight and also with the band. You can do them side lying with a small weight too, just to keep all the external rotators active and switched on. I also did a lot of direct deltoid work as well, so keeping the elbow flexed in a comfortable position with a very light weight, lots of side raises, again kind of between 50 and 100 reps. In the morning I would do, because again I was sleeping with my arm like this in this position, so I wanted to work my posterior shoulder, so I would do lots of bent over flies in this position, and I would also look at some T's and Y's, so scapular retraction work. I would do it prone and then also in this position as well, maybe with a bit of flexion of the elbow, again to condition all the muscles at the back of the shoulder. Isometric exercise is great when you're injured as well, because it's very safe. You can control the range, but you can still get a high threshold motor units and a lot of activation. So against the floor or the wall, lean back, get the elbows there in a kind of a bilateral rowing position, keep the head there, and then drive my elbows back into the wall as hard as possible for 6 seconds, and that would activate all the muscles of the upper back, get my scapula in a good position. You can use the wall as proprioception to feel that you've got the scaps down and packed. So 10 reps of a 6-second max effort contraction as well. And all these exercises are very safe to do for high reps with a high frequency. So I could do them every day for that 3 weeks leading up to the surgery to keep the back of the shoulder healthy. And you can think about whatever injury you've got, how do you keep the major joints mobile, strong, well coordinated and healthy before you undergo the procedure. So remember, motion is lotion. You must move the joints to keep them healthy. Because of the poorer blood supply in the joint, they receive their nutrients via diffusion from movement. So movement is your friend. Keep everything well oiled and you'll reduce the amount of compensations that you have, and therefore reduce the time it takes you to get back to where you need to be following a period of immobilization. The other really important thing you need to do if you're going to have a surgery is turn up as fit aerobically as you possibly can be. So develop your aerobic system, because that will underpin the physiology of the healing process. It'll help you recover from the trauma of a surgery and heal faster. So use whatever means are available to you depending on the injury. With a torn bicep, I could not do the things I preferred to do for cardio, but I could do stationary bike and rucking, so walking with a weighted vest or a rucksack on for long periods. And by using those methods, which are quite low impact and safe, I was able to develop my cardiovascular system, improve my aerobic fitness, and turn up to the surgery as aerobically fit as I could be, and then that has a dramatic accelerative effect on your recovery post-surgery. So stay mobile, keep as fit as you can, attack your recovery with purpose. Next week, I'm going to talk about some exercises you can do to train around an injury. So how do you do upper body with a lower body injury? How do you do lower body with an upper body injury? Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss one, and go to edwardbakerperformance.com for the full series of articles and videos.